It's a combination of two things we talked about. We talked about the trucker convoy that was going on in Canada, protesting vaccine mandates, and they have decided to crack down on not just the financial. They already had decided to confiscate money from GoFundMe and all these centralized locations, but they're now going after cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin, because Bitcoiners had helped fund this stuff using Bitcoin, and the big question is, can they get away with it? Is Bitcoin going to survive? So there's multiple questions here, but first, let's play the clip from the Deputy Prime Minister Christina Freeland, where she announces what they're going to do.
And is this like their vice president? Like, is that what deputy?
No, she's a deputy.
Prime
She's
Minister means, or?
yes, deputy prime minister. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, but
Like
she's
second in
also
command or whatever?
But she's also focuses. I think she's a little more like a cabinet member. She focuses on the
Okay.
finance, whatever the hell their finance treasury secretary kind of thing is.
As of today, all crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use must register with FINTRAC, and they must report large and suspicious transactions to FINTRAC. This will help mitigate the risk that these platforms receive illicit funds, increase the quality and quantity of intelligence received by FINTRAC, and make more information available to support investigations by law enforcement into these illegal blockades. We are making these changes because we know that these platforms are being used to support illegal blockades and illegal activity, which is damaging the Canadian economy. The government will also bring forward legislation to provide these authorities to FINTRAC on a permanent basis. Second, the government is issuing an order with immediate effect under the Emergencies Act, authorizing Canadian financial institutions to temporarily cease providing financial services where the institution suspects that an account is being used to further the illegal blockades and occupations. This order covers both personal and corporate accounts. Third, we are directing Canadian financial institutions to review their relationships with anyone involved in the illegal blockades and report to the RCMP or CSIS. As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability for actions taken in good faith. Federal government institutions will have a new broad authority to share relevant information with banks and other financial service providers to ensure that we can all work together to put a stop to the funding of these illegal blockades. This is about following the money. This is about stopping the financing of these illegal blockades. We are today serving notice. If your truck is being used in these illegal blockades, your corporate accounts will be frozen. The insurance on your vehicle will be suspended. Send your semi-trailers home. The Canadian economy needs them to be doing legitimate work, not to be illegally making us all poorer.
Wow. So as part of this, they blocked 29. Well, actually, they didn't block 29 Bitcoin addresses, but they flagged 29 Bitcoin addresses that have transacted up to $1 million worth of Bitcoin. They have issued it to a bunch of different registered entities, including registered exchanges, Bitcoin exchanges, and basically said you can't transact with these people. So the question is, can they be successful? Is this good? So as we talked about a long time ago, first of all, let's frame it a little bit broader first. They use the Emergency Powers Act. So this is usually used for war, so this is quite unusual, certainly for protest. Not to say that everything they were doing was legal, but it was certainly not, it was more akin to probably civil disobedience than it was to terrorism, and they're linking him under terrorism and any money laundering stuff. So very different. So already you can see this will reduce issues that are compounding here, and Bitcoiners are not a big fan of it as a general rule. But then comes the second question: is there much they can do? So, and how did we get here? First of all, they used Tallycoin. So Tallycoin was a funding, online funding group for Bitcoin. It had an option to allow every donation to use a new address. Instead, they used this. They didn't check that option and do it with one address. So as a result, it becomes pretty easy to track the funds. This is almost certainly the first mistake they made. They did allow for Lightning transactions. The Lightning transactions are secure, are very hard to track Lightning. It uses Tor. It's very secure, very private. But the on-chain transactions, as we know, Bitcoin is a public ledger. It's pseudonymous. So you can if you can ever link a public address to a specific person, then you can track that money, presumably at least for a while, unless you engage in other privacy actions, including maybe perhaps putting that money into through the Lightning Network, or using CoinJoin, or a couple other things you can do to try to disguise those transactions further down the road so they become hard to track. But they do have these 29 and they addresses, and they have a good idea of some of the people involved. They certainly know. Greg Foss was one of them. This guy named, it goes by BT Sessions. It's Ben something or other, I forget his last name, but he's pretty well known in Bitcoin. Both these people are well. Bitcoin. Jeff Booth, we talked about Jeff Booth a lot. Power Price of Tomorrow. They're all involved in this funding, helping the fundraiser, and for a while were in charge of the private keys. They've now since moved them on to some other people, and got them into the hands of. There's a nonprofit for the truckers, and they got them in the hands of the board of directors there. So they are now completely in control of it. But Canada's trying to control the on-ramps and off-ramps. So the idea here is now you can't go, because right now you can't use Bitcoin as a daily transaction. They're trying to that would be we call that a Bitcoin circular economy, where you can buy once you're in Bitcoin, you can use Bitcoin, spend Bitcoin, earn Bitcoin. You never have to go back into fiat. But right now, as a practical matter, you generally do. So they're trying to control whether or not they can turn this Bitcoin into usable currency inside Canada, Canadian dollars. Like as a practical matter, there's multiple issues here. First, did they overstep their bounds with the Emergency Act? I'm sure there'll be lawsuits about this in Canada. What could they have? What could the funders have done? What can the funders do now? They have millions of dollars sitting up that's potentially being hung up here, and so I guess the first question is: do we think they overstepped their bounds? I guess let's start there.
Hearing her say those things is definitely shocking. I'm not. I mean, they're not messing around. They're here to play hardball. Apparently, I'm not for what the Canadian truckers are doing, but I mean, suspending the insurance, freezing the corporate accounts, all that stuff is pretty crazy. It does feel overreacting a little bit, for sure. But it does set up an interesting experiment to see how Bitcoin could handle this, because obviously they were worried about something like this, and that's why they moved to Bitcoin, and that's why a lot of Bitcoiners were helping them out. But it doesn't sound like maybe they got a little lazy on the way they implemented Bitcoin, and now it might bite them in the ass because they put it all into the same wallets.
Yeah. So I would say, I'll say for the first thing, I do think they're overstepping. Whether or not they're legally overstepping, different question. I don't know Canadian law well enough to know. But this is very draconian. It's very authoritarian to go after people. This is one of the things Bitcoiners don't like, and I would agree with it. I don't like financial surveillance. I don't like financial control. It's a good way to shut down speech you don't like. And we can argue that at least some of the stuff they were doing was probably not illegal, and some of it probably was illegal. And certainly the Bitcoiner part was aimed at the Ottawa protests, not at the people who were sitting on border crossings. So presumably they're not funding the guy sitting on the boarding crossing who I think is blatantly involved in something illegal. Whether or not you can shut down a street is probably a different question, and probably you can't. But it's certainly a lot less of a threat to your economy than shutting down a border. And I do know that the money was aimed at the Ottawa protests, not. Now, of course, there's probably some overlap. There always is, certainly with crazy people. So I get why they're doing this. I think it's draconian. I think it's authoritarian. I think it's problematic. and we'll see if they get away from it from a legal perspective, which I think is a different conversation and one I am not really in a position to have much of a thought on, in the sense that I'm not a Canadian lawyer. So it does seem extreme, though. With that being said, Bitcoin will survive this. The question is, will that money survive this? Will the money get stuck? And that's a little bit more of a... It can get out. There are ways to coin join. There are ways to... you can put it up in Lightning Network. Again, the Lightning Network, they should have probably done from the beginning only Lightning fundraising, because that would have kept it a lot more private from the beginning. I was probably started there, but they didn't go that way. So now we've got this problem where this money might be stuck. And the problem with this is kind of an attack on Bitcoin's what we call fungibility. So fungibility is a characteristic of money itself. Good money should be used by anyone. It should not care. Gold is a good example. Cash is a good example. They're very fungible. If you're a drug dealer's $100 is the same as my $100 from a practical perspective, unless I know for a fact it's from a drug dealer, right? I can't accept it if I know they're buying drugs, but if they're buying drugs from me. But that's because the transaction is legal. But the fact that it came from some drug dealer down the line, it's not something I'm privy to or known, and that's called fungibility. So that's the idea. This is an attack on Bitcoin's fungibility. It means that you could suddenly have tainted Bitcoin, as it were, think of like a blood diamond kind of thing. So blood Bitcoin. This Bitcoin is no longer tainted. You can't use it. So that's why you want these privacy tools to make it, to kind of keep Bitcoin's fungibility, which is a very, very important aspect of money, especially for successful money. And this is probably the weakest part in Bitcoin, in my opinion. It's definitely the fact that it's not truly anonymous cryptocurrency. It's pseudonymous, and people are going to try to do what they do with fiat rails in the digital realm. So while the U.S. government can't control whether or not you use physical dollars, they absolutely can control your bank account. They can control SWIFT. They can control moving money between banks in a digital way. So they're trying to kind of put that power into the Bitcoin, and they can't put it into Bitcoin directly, but they can put it into fiat and Bitcoin. And eventually Bitcoin will become a circular economy and it becomes less of a problem. I do think that happens eventually, but we're far and away from there right now. So as a practical matter, does it get stuck until we're at a Bitcoin circular economy? And the answer is, it depends on who's got control of this. And they do have Bitcoiners who are working with them. Some of them more knowledgeable now, probably. But people who are super knowledgeable on this, like Matt Odell, I'm not sure if I've ever talked about him. He's a huge privacy advocate for Bitcoin and has done a bunch of talks on it. He has several podcasts. He's not been working with them, but he has been a big advocate for getting ahead of this stuff because he thought it was going to come. And now we are here. And the question is, do we have enough tools to get around it? And I think the long run, yes. The short run, it's a practical problem where it's not particularly user-friendly yet, all the privacy tools. And I don't know who in the trucker community has control of these private keys, but they're probably not the most technologically savvy people. They're probably not hardcore Bitcoiners. They are being advised by some Bitcoiners. So it depends on the strength of those Bitcoiners and how good they are at being able to advise them, keeping in mind that these people as individuals are going to be attacked by the government itself. So how much do they want to stick their neck out further than they already have is another question. And this is how we get into whether or not states control them or not. And I do think it's an interesting experiment. I'm kind of with you, Luke, that I'm not sure I have the answer yet. In the long run, I'm not worried. In the short run, short to medium term, like next 10 years, we'll find out how successful this could be, because it could be quite successful for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think eventually it becomes much more user-friendly and harder to do, and we'll be better at this. But it is like a first foray into it from a Western world perspective.